بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله هو الذي أرسله الله تبارك وتعالى بالدين الحق ليعلم الناس الكتاب والحكمة وليبين لهم ما هو السبيل إليه فنصلي ونسلم على محمد بن عبد الله عليه أفضل الصلاة والتسليم وهو خاتم الأنبياء والسيد المرسلين. We wanted to give attention to the theme of importance, the issue of masjids, and specifically within the black community, to exactly get a solid understanding of the demographics that we're dealing with. I think it's important to go into a dialogue with Dr. Khalid Blankenship. Dr. Ihsan Bagby. May Allah bless Dr. Khalid. Dr. Ihsan Bagby. And one of the reasons is that Dr. Ihsan has been the only scholarly voice to apply tools to understanding the plight of the Muslim community as a whole, and in specific the black community. And he has studied the Masaajid across the country. Now 2020, this year, we have to reach out to him because he said that there's his new advanced study is supposed to be coming out. And I personally have used that study and have benefited his old study, which was done some years back. I've used it and I found it to be extremely accurate in his predictions about the Muslim community. There's data sets in there that he has laid out with regard to the character of different trends in masjid organization. Like you have the strongman masjid, you have the strong board masjid, you have the imamless masjid, you have masajid with imams, you have masajid in the suburbs, you have some masajid in the city, like that type of thing. He has classified the masajid across the country, and he has added data sets to his demographic study that have been or have proven useful, at least to me, in projecting trajectories and trends in how cultures and communities develop. There's cultures that develop within these institutions. And so the issue comes back down to, like, for instance, a lot of what we're seeing now with the en masse effort or movement, a lot of the questioning with regard to the deen, reality 100%. That's not the reality 100%. We don't want to characterize the black community as being a community that just needs a handout, because that's not necessarily the case in every situation. You have some communities, like for instance in New York, that the issue comes back down to money, from the angle of not necessarily that the people can't hold their own, but they're living in a gentrified existence. You know what I'm saying? And so the gentrification process is taking out everyone, regardless, of what people's economic standing is. You know what I'm saying? If you can't compete at that level that's being set by the gentrification processes, and some people, they have money, but if you can't compete at the level that the culture of the city is demanding, it's just wrecking masajid. Like the whole idea of just needing $1 million just to start off with. Even communities in the suburbs, even though they may raise 5 million or 2 million or 3 million, even communities in the suburbs to kick off $1 million right off the bat, it's not always easy. There's some communities that exist in the suburbs that they're not million communities, multi-million-dollar communities. And so you find there's challenges like that, like the issue of gentrification. You find there's the issue of trying to find a term for it. The graying population. I was looking for another term for it, but people, you have some masajid that are occupied by only elderly people, and so there's no younger generation to come and take the lead after them. And that's pretty serious from the angle of, I know I'm not going to mention the masjid, may Allah put barakah in it, or I'm not even going to mention the region, but I know a masjid that was built ground up by the African American community. It was the first masjid in that particular area that was built ground up. They even got to the point where they changed zoning laws. These were historic moves that were made prior to a lot of the masajid that are in the US and so on and so forth that had issue with zoning. They actually went and changed the zoning laws so that they can make the masjid face Mecca. May Allah bless them for an eternity. And so it's a growing population. The youth never really had there was never really a follow-up with the youth. And the masjid has classrooms. The masjid has a full-blown kitchen, an awesome space. It's in an area right now which is turning into a multi-million-dollar area. You can't touch big buildings if you're not coming in with money. But the population is graying. And with the population graying means that basically the masjid is going to fall under the threat of non-existence, right? Because of the way that things turned out. And so in any event, those are some of the threats that are there, gentrification, aging population. And I mentioned one implicitly, the issue of economics. But the question is it an obligation? I personally think that, we can build the case that it's an obligation. First, when masajid are established, they should be maintained. But what happens when the conditions for maintaining them are not there? That's the question. And I think that this calls for a more solid study, meaning that we're going to have to look in the Sharia, and we're going to have to see how to properly address this in more detail, right? I know that some people, are up for the types of, some people will let the community collapse, so to speak. So once those masajid go, those areas are stuck without a masjid base, and that means that the Muslims will no longer have a presence in those communities where there's masajid. There's the issue, like we were working on before, of consolidation. That's another issue, consolidating masajid, versus having a number of different masajid, just consolidating the masajid, and that's something that's extremely important, especially in those cases where the masjid was built from the ground up, so to speak. The consolidation of the masajid becomes extremely important, because those masajid that were built from the bottom up and that were actually built to be masajid, not converted houses or buildings or storefronts. And there's nothing wrong with those. I'm not judging, but I'm saying that those masajid that they, from their intention, the architectural plan was built from the angle of establishing a masjid. Those masjid should probably take precedence to the other masajid, to save those masajid, because the structure itself was set out to be a masjid. There's no issue of that we're renting the place, or there's no, some masajid that exist, they're storefronts that are rented. That's fine, but that's different than a building that's already purchased, or a church that was already converted, or a building that was already constructed. You know what I'm saying? So we have to create a list of priorities. What buildings, that are established, especially those that are paid off. Those buildings that are paid off, they take major precedence to the buildings which are still, in the process, so to speak. That's it. The idea here is like to just get some priorities out. That's what we have to start thinking, and then nationalize the idea. Where's the prioritization? And honestly, and this is the conversation, that we should be having, there has to be a change in our discourse. There has to be a complete change in our discourse and in our sense of priorities, and in our sense of dealing with things. These Masaajid, they if they're gone, there's nothing left. And let's be honest. Let's talk honestly. A lot of people don't feel comfortable in spaces which are not hospitable to them. And so that's not only the Muslim community as a whole is still struggling with an ethnic struggle. We do better than, I would say, than what was done, like, for instance, with the Christians and so on and so forth. The Catholics especially, they just totally went ethnic. The Albanian church, the Italian church, the Irish church. And they established themselves in that way. And each cultural group, because the Europeans in that time, when they were coming, they were extremely, ethnocentric. The Muslims have some issues with ethnocentricity, but not to the degree that was there. That doesn't give us an excuse, because we know the teachings of Islam. It doesn't give us an excuse, but it's a little more easier to work with. But in any event, people, they don't feel comfortable across cultures. It's not, I don't want to make this a primarily issue of melanin, so to speak, because it's not always completely an issue of melanin. There's the issue of, there's a funeral in later June. So there's a funeral that's passing by that caught my attention. So the issue that comes to the fore sometimes is that, we're still navigating cultures. You have this issue, for instance, if you look in the Michigan community, like, for instance, if you look at the Bangladeshi and the Yemeni communities, both of those communities, they're very rooted in their cultures, like in places like Hamtramck. And so the Bangladeshis, they're still speaking Bangla very strongly, and the Yemenis are speaking Arabic very strongly. And sometimes there's no common ground in language for them just to come together. Also, the Bangladeshis are very Hanafi, you know what I'm saying? And and you find that the Yemenis are not in that approach. Some of them are very Salafi or other movements, and so sometimes that in itself creates a clash. So that I'm giving that example to say that it's not always a melanin issue. It's not always an anti-blackness issue. But in any event, the issue of hospitality is the point here, that people may not feel hospitable, may not feel like it's a hospitable environment for them to go out. So that in itself creates an environment which you have to maintain the Masaajid to maintain certain communities so that they stay afloat and they're able to grow. Leadership has to think like that. You gotta, leadership can't get stuck in, the whole issue of this group and that group. You have to kind of go to a bird's eye view to kind of look at the grassroots of what's going on, and you have to kind of look at in a wide spectrum beyond group and beyond this and that, and then you also focus on the group from the grassroots up, right? But you got to look at the level of the ummah, and you have to look at the level of community and what's going on and everything, and then you also look grassroots, and then you look from the people's perspective. It's a multi-angle issue. I think we need to build the case that there's an obligation to at least, make sure that there is 1 to 2 Masaajid of these sorts in these cities that in which they exist, that they maintain themselves. And that's going to take a radical change of culture, because sometimes the leadership in those Masaajid are anti-growth. Sometimes the leadership in those Masaajid are the reason why those Masaajid are in those conditions. And then sometimes the issue is that the zakat and the sadaqah in the general community is not equally distributed. You know what I'm saying? For the needs of the community. Again, there's a lack of leadership at that point. Because any sort of leadership that has any type of consciousness is going to look at the needs of the community as a whole. A lot of times there's a distribution of zakatul fitr, but there's not a distribution of zakatul mal, right? And so zakatul fitr becomes like, yes, let's go see who are the poor people, so to speak. And then all of a sudden there's a better distribution than the zakatul mal. The zakatul mal, a lot of times, is not distributed properly. And the Catholics went through this problem, by the way. The Catholics went through this problem. I saw this in Philadelphia, when the Catholic Church demands a certain amount of money comes in for the sustainability of each community, each parish, each church. The parish is like kind of like an area that has a number of churches under it. And so they also give a certain percentage to Rome. They collect a certain amount of money, they send it to Rome. But sometimes the parish has enough money to maintain certain churches which are not staying afloat. When they became economically inviable, they started consolidating churches. And actually, the church that my family was a significant part of, my grandmother was extremely involved in that, my aunts and everybody, it shut down. And it created a whole vacuum. As a matter of fact, it shut down for a while, and I believe, if I'm correct, that the church became, after a certain period of time, a haven for, illicit activities, and then they took it back. But it fell into disrepair and so on and so forth. So even they found themselves in that situation where economically it wasn't viable, and they just let it go, and basically they consolidated the churches, right? And we've talked about that. Some of us have talked about that without mentioning names. The issue that there's some Masaajid that the imams are up in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and then the building is there, but no community around it. And that's the situation that we have. But, that stuff has to be prioritized. And the thing is, like, without any sort of collective effort, you can't put that necessarily on the individual unless the individual wants to champion that cause. So the thinking has to be, how can we, address that situation overall, right? And I think that open conversations now in some places, and some of you I know personally on this point, in some places now the administration to the Masaajid has changed to a younger administration. So they're more open to the idea of support and collaboration and cooperation. And so it may be time to inject a proposal to those Masaajid that have that type of board, that, look, we want to at least, have this particular masjid, maintained, and then it's like go into a dialogue with that. That was my concern about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, that was my concern, and I scoped out 3 masjids, and that was part of the idea that, can we create a confederation of Masaajid, or can we consolidate Masaajid? That became the issue. But it's not only the issue of consolidating the Masaajid or saying the Masaajid. It's also the issue that we have a Muslim population which is the mosque. It's just like the unchurched movement. That's where the unmosque concept came from. That they were borrowing. I believe they were borrowing that idea from the churches. The unchurched movement. People stopped going to church. The same thing with the masjid. Honestly, for as much critique as people put on Jamaat Tabligh, this is one of their strong points. That one of the things that they inculcate in people, which is a general Islamic teaching, but they inculcate it from the beginning. We have to inculcate it as well, is the importance of going to the masjid. The importance of the masjid in the life of the Muslim. Right. And so that becomes the issue. You know what I'm saying? That becomes the issue, that if the masjid is not important to the Muslim, then saving the Masaajid, becomes an issue. You know what I'm saying? But in any event, this needs to be a national dialogue. With the next 5 to 10 years is going to be, I'll give it 5 years. Forget about 10 years. I'll say 5 years from some of the imams that I'm thinking just off the rip or off the top of my head that are in their 70s and 80s. Some of them are sickly. And we know that the people following up are not going to have the same level of accountability and responsibility. So we're going to start seeing a number of different Masaajid lose imams, right? And once those imams are gone, those Masaajid fall under threat. And again, that was my talk about the succession plan. Not to say because of me, but I'm saying that in my files, this is an idea that's associated with another idea. And that's the issue of succession plans. That Muslims don't have succession plans for the continuity of their institutions. That's a serious issue. I want to end on that note. I think it deserves a national dialogue. and it needs to be put out there. It needs to be put out there to all the imams, the senior imams, the younger brothers, the active brothers, and it needs a collective effort. There's some places that we can't afford to lose masajid in, period. Some cities like for instance, MIB, like if we lost MIB, if we lost Masjid Taqwa, if we lose those masajid, we're done. And there's masajid in Philly. There's masajid in Cleveland. You know what I'm saying? There's masajid in Pittsburgh. There's masajid in Atlantic City. There's masajid in Camden, New Jersey. There's masajid in Newark. There's masajid in a lot of different places, that are central in the country. In Indianapolis, the one masjid that was in the administration of the African American community, it was taken over, and it was lost, and then so you have a number of different masajid that if they go out the door, they have historical significance, then is a loss to the community overall. We need to realize that there's serious challenges, economic challenges. It's a tied-in package, but we have to take each thing step by step. But it is a tied-in package, because if people can't afford to live around the masjid, and if there's no plan of economic development and upliftment, for sure those areas are going to lose the masajid, because the people are not going to be able to stay there to support the masajid. They're going to go elsewhere. But if they go elsewhere, there's examples in religious communities. I kind of extended this out a little bit, but I wanted to at least record the idea. There's examples where some religious communities, they won't go to another place without their leadership. And they won't go to another place without their leadership and without their community. And this is outside of the Muslim community, right? There's examples from outside of the Muslim community. There's examples actually come from the Hasidic community. The Hasidic Jewish community, some of them won't leave to another place unless they're going as a Jamaat with leadership. And so then they're able to reconstruct the community in another place because of that type of strategic thinking. And so that's the same thing. If people are not going to be able to afford to be around these masajid, then they have to think of where can they go to build community in a place where they can be viable, right? That's, if the masjid is not central to our understanding of Islam, that's a serious problem. That's a serious problem. And I know that some of us, it just doesn't fall like that. Some of us, it just doesn't fall that, we're going to be around the masjid, this and that, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't mean that we can't plan for that to be the case overall, even if some of us don't participate in that reality, right? And so at the end of the day, the conversation is one of priority. Multiple stars, put it there, put it in your priority bucket. It has to be something that, these are the things that we should be using social media for. Changing the conversation, where, changing the culture, prioritizing, and then you have your personal planning from behind the scenes. But the culture, changing the dialogue, changing the conversation. And it's unfortunate that, there's a lot of nonsense that's there, but it's not putting things to the forefront. But in any event, is a conversation which involves all of us. It affects some of us more than others, but it's definitely a priority, and it's something that's necessary, right? We have to put it out there. You have to put it out there, and it needs a bulleted strategy, because again, these 5 years are going to be very crucial. We may see the loss of some historic masajids. Right. We may see the loss of some historic masajid. And then that brings us to the conversation that others have been having. Like, Imam Fahim and Imam Amin and others with regard to, the issue of economics and imams and actually Imam Naim as well. The whole issue of imams being supported in these places. Right. And it's just going to take a different strategy. Or a series of strategies to approach these issues. And we may, I don't know, the concept of the Bayah Masjid, that's probably one of the reasons why those communities at least existed, because people had a sense of loyalty and commitment. I don't know if that can exist 100% in today's time, but there's no doubt that without loyalty and commitment, there's not going to be any masjids that survive in these environments, because you need people that are committed in their loyalty to these masjids with their time and their money in order for them to keep going. Right. I want to end on that note because I went overextended where I needed to go to. But at least the ideas I recorded, people can build on them, and we can move on from this. Assalamu alaikum.